The first few prakim of Masechet Shevi'it introduced us to the basics of the different types of land, different types of agricultural work, and different schedules for when various work can and cannot be done. After learning in the fifth Perek of objects that may not be sold in year 7 to prevent people from doing agricultural work, our Perek turns to a different and perhaps more fundamental issue.
The Mishnah in Kiddushin teaches that any land-oriented mitzvah, mitzvah tliyah ba'aretz, is only in effect in the land of Israel. Chol mitzvah shetliyah ba'aretz ina noheget ela ba'aretz. But what exactly is the land of Israel? Where does it begin? Where does it end? Reading Tanakh would tell us that there are lots of maps of where the promised land was supposed to or expected to extend, but our Mishnah tells us that practically those ideals don't matter.
The land of Israel is actually defined by the people. Where the Jewish people live or lived is what makes it holy. Where they did not has no sanctity. So the Mishnah begins, Shalosh aratzot lishvi'it. There are 3 types of land for Shemitah, arranged hierarchically. The first, Kol shehechziku olei Bavel, where the Jews lived when they returned from Galut Bavel, from the Babylonian exile, is fully forbidden during Shemitah. Lo ne'achal v'lo ne'evad. It may not be consumed and it may not be worked. The second, Kol shehechziku olei Mitzrayim, where the Jews lived when they entered Canaan from Egypt, a larger area, ne'achal aval lo ne'evad, may not be worked but may be consumed. And third, beyond that, ne'achal v'ne'evad, there is no Shemitah. The fruit may be consumed and even agricultural work is permitted.
The Mishnah includes specific landmarks, but more interesting to us is the way that land becomes kadosh. We could look in the Torah to see what the borders of the promised land are, but it turns out that those are not what determine the sanctity. Instead, the kedusha comes from the physical presence of the Jewish people on the land. The Talmud extrapolated from our Mishnah to 2 times that the Jewish people sanctified the land. Kedusha Rishonah, the first sanctification, was when they arrived in Israel from Egypt. And Kedusha Shniya, the second sanctification, was after the Babylonian exile, when they returned and built the second Beit HaMikdash. And the Talmud records a debate about how long the Kedusha lasted in each case. Of course, if Kedusha never went away, there would be no need for a second. The first Kedusha never went away, there would be no need for a second Kedusha.
The Rambam rules that the first Kedusha did in fact end. The sanctity brought to the land by Olei Mitzrayim evaporated when the Jews were exiled. But the second Kedusha never did evaporate. Kedusha Shniya, Kidsha L'Sha'ata, V'Kidsha La'atid Lavo. Why this difference? The Rambam explains that Kedushat Haaretz needs a few conditions. First, the land needs to be potentially sacred. No matter how many Jews live in Brooklyn, there will never be Kedushat Haaretz there. The land has to be within the borders promised in the Torah. Second, the Jews have to arrive to actually sanctify the land. It is potentially sacred because of the geography, but not actually sacred until the people sanctify it by their presence. And it cannot be just individual Jews. The Kedusha only comes as the result of something that the Jews do altogether.
So both Olei Mitzrayim and Olei Bavel sanctify the land. But, says the Rambam in Perek Aleph of Hilchot Shemot, the important difference is how they got the land. Regarding the first Kedusha, the Kedusha Rishonah affected by the people of Yeshua's generation, Lefi she'ayta mipnei kibush bilvad, Kidsha l'sha'ata v'lo kidsha la'atid lavo. Because the people took the land by force, they could lose it by force as well. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. And this is true of Kedusha. Kedusha can be created by force, as we see here, but then it's transient Kedusha. Imposed by might, it disappears when that might is overpowered. And so the Olei Mitzrayim, who conquered the land and made it holy, had only a temporary effect of the sanctity of the land.
On the other hand, Olei Bavel did not have to fight to return to the land that their grandparents had farmed 3 generations earlier. Kevan sha'alu b'nei hagola v'hechziku b'miktzat ha'aretz, kidshuha kedusha shniya ha'omedet le'olam, l'sha'ata la'atid lavo. The Kedusha wrought by Olei Bavel is everlasting because they peaceably created it. As it turns out, the Olei Bavel were far fewer in number and took up far less space than the Olei Mitzrayim. This means that there were areas that were kadosh during the days of Bayit Rishon that did not have the Kedusha during the days of Bayit Sheni or today. The Mishnah specifies the far north of the land, north of Achziv, as land that was not sanctified Kedusha Shniya. Lands in the south of Beersheba, were presumably never sanctified, since neither Olei Mitzrayim nor Olei Bavel settled there. This should mean that one would be allowed to even work the land south of Beersheba during Shemitah. Of course, the Negev is not very good agricultural land, which is why no one settled there in antiquity anyway.
So there are at least two interesting practical questions that arise here with deep implications for thinking about modern halacha and Shemitah in our time. First, how do we determine the borders of where Olei Bavel settled to figure out where agricultural work is forbidden during Shemitah? The Mishnah gives us one detailed example. What about the rest? Should we check with archaeologists who may tell us, for example, that Olei Bavel never took the coastal plain, which was the home of other people, and therefore conclude that Shemitah would not apply on the coastal plain? In other words, can the findings of archaeologists and historians inform our halachic decision-making?
And second, on the other hand, can we talk about a Kedusha Shlishit? In the past century, great numbers of Jews have moved to the land of Israel, taking up far more space than either Olei Mitzrayim or the Olei Bavel. So what now? Do areas like the coastal plain or the Golan, excluded from Kedusha Shniya, now fall under Kedusha Shlishit, since the Jewish people as a whole has moved to the land and sanctified it? How we answer these questions will depend on how much we think halacha has to take into account of modern knowledge and of modern history. These are weighty issues raised by the 6th Perek of Masechet Shevi'it. Thank you for learning with us.